To have a long-term future, we must ultimately leave Earth. The book is called The Future of Humanity: Terraforming Mars, Interstellar Travel, Immortality, and Our Destiny Beyond Earth. And Professor Michio Kaku joins us now. Welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Glad to be on.
So in your new book, you write that it is inevitable that humanity will meet its end, the Earth will become inhabitable for humans, and that we can either leave, adapt, or die. This all sounds scary. When and how is all of this happening?
Well, you know, the dinosaurs did not have a space program. That's why they're not here today. They didn't have Plan B. They didn't have an insurance policy. We do have Plan B. We have a space program capable of going to the moon, Mars, and perhaps even beyond. Now, NASA, of course, has been criticized for being the agency to nowhere. It doesn't go anywhere. That's all changed. Get this, starting next year, we go back to the moon. That's official now, December 2019, back to the moon. And then Mars, and who knows, beyond that. And that'll give us an insurance policy, just in case something bad happens.
And I want to come back to NASA a little bit more as well. But you view that it is our destiny to explore and to colonize other planets. But some people push back and say, you know what, this Earth has a lot of problems. We need to deal with those right here and right now. Why is space exploration and ultimately colonization so important?
Well, you know, I once talked to Carl Sagan about this. And he said, look, we got to settle Earth problems on Earth. These are political problems like global warming. Going to outer space is not going to solve global warming. However, he said, we should become at least a two-planet species because we have to have a settlement there in case something bad happens to the planet Earth. Meteorite impacts. We can also have supervolcanoes. We can also have ice ages take place. And 5 billion years from now, the sun will eat up the Earth. It's practically a law of physics that one day our days on the Earth will be over. And that's why we want to make sure that humanity survives all these disasters.
So creating a settlement on Mars, what will that take? That sounds hard.
Well, to go to the moon is a piece of cake these days. 3 days to the moon. You leave on Monday, come back on the weekends. Now, going to Mars is more difficult. Mars is 2 years away. 9 months to go to Mars. Then you have to do experiments and wait for the time to be right to come back. Another 9 months for the trip back. So we're talking about initially pretty hardy people. These are astronauts, they're trained scientists, they're people who know it's going to be a 2 years, very serious journey to Mars.
So we're looking at video right now from SpaceX, Elon Musk's space exploration company. What will be and what has been the role of private enterprise from billionaire visionaries like Elon Musk and Richard Branson and Steve Bezos?
They've changed everything. The price of space travel has gone down because of these billionaires. That moon rocket, the Falcon Heavy, millions of people tuned into that Falcon Heavy rocket. That was a moon rocket. And how much did it cost taxpayers? Nothing. It was free because it was paid for by Elon Musk. Now, space travel is so cheap that the movie The Martian, many people saw that movie with Matt Damon, that cost $100 million. However, to go to Mars, the Indians did it with $70 million. So they ought to give an Oscar for the best supporting space probe. Hollywood movies today cost more than sending a probe to Mars.
So it sounds like then the private enterprise is kind of doing some of this research for humanity because they can afford to.
That's right. And remember the used car industry? That revolutionized car ownership after the World War II. Well, now we're going to have reusable rockets, compliments of Elon Musk. You saw that Falcon Heavy take off? The 2 booster rockets came back to Earth, ready for the next journey to the moon. And again, that was a moon rocket. That was not the shuttle. That was a moon rocket that blasted off from Cape Canaveral for free.
So you write about the idea of terraforming Mars to make it more hospitable for humans and more habitable for humans. How do you do that?
Well, we are actually terraforming the Earth right now. With global warming, for the worse, we're actually changing the weather patterns on the planet Earth. We can terraform Mars for the better. We can, for example, in the future, not anytime soon, but launch satellites that will beam sunlight onto the polar ice caps. Mars has plenty of water, but it's in frozen form. We can melt the ice caps by shooting sunlight onto the ice caps so that rivers and lakes flow freely on the surface of Mars. Mars once had an ocean the size of the United States of America. That's how much water Mars had, but it's all frozen. We can unfreeze it.
Now, this would be a pretty big project, obviously something on a scale that humans have never undertaken before and require years, decades, maybe hundreds of years of commitment. How do we get society and humanity to commit to something that might not be seen until our great-grandchildren are around?
Well, it's going to happen anyway because all of a sudden we have Silicon Valley billionaires financing it. Elon Musk has his Falcon Heavy rocket, and also Jeff Bezos, the richest man on Earth, has his own spaceport. He doesn't have to go to Cape Canaveral. He launches from Texas, and he has a fleet of rockets. We may have a traffic jam over the moon. And we also have Richard Branson of Virgin Atlantic fielding his rocket, which will take tourists into outer space. I wouldn't be surprised if one day people have honeymoons on the moon. Going to the moon is not going to be such a big deal. 3 days and you can have this glorious honeymoon on the moon. And to pay for it, Google billionaires are now jumping in. They don't want to be left out either. Why should Bezos and Musk have all the fun? They're funding asteroid mining. They want to capture a small asteroid, maybe 50 feet across, mine it for $50 billion worth of platinum and rare earth elements. So Google does not want to be left out either, and that's going to help pay for many of these missions.
Now, President Trump, he has declared his mission to send astronauts back to the moon. Do we need to do this as part of research and development on the way to colonizing and to building a base on Mars?
Well, I'm all for robots. Robots are cheap. They go out and they don't have to come back. However, robots are very limited in what they can do. We've sent several robots to Mars, and they still can't dig in the soil. They still can't do basic physics experiments because it's very limited what robots can do. Humans can just blow the whole thing open. We could create a Mars base. We could create all sorts of facilities, power plants, and agricultural centers and farms to make it self-sufficient. So we're talking about using genetically modified plants to create farms on Mars so we don't have to ship food to the astronauts. They can grow food with genetically modified plants.
NASA went to the moon 50 years ago, and if you had asked some people then, they thought we'd be living in the space age by now. What happened? Has NASA lost its way?
No, what happened was the Cold War was over, and we forget the cost of space travel back then. You realize that in 1966, the NASA budget was 5% of the total federal budget. That's unsustainable. 5% of every dollar went to the space program. Now it's 0.5%. And as I mentioned, Silicon Valley billionaires are footing the bill. And so we're talking about a whole new era. Economics have changed totally, and these rockets are reusable. Space travel could go down by a factor of 10.
So with the discovery of thousands of planets beyond our solar system, that means the search for other intelligent life, other aliens, has intensified. What is the likelihood that we will have definitive proof of this other life?
I think that, I think the aliens are out there. I get a lot of emails from people that say that they've been abducted by flying saucers, so they've met the aliens. I tell them, the next time you're abducted by a flying saucer, steal something. I don't care what it is, an alien paperweight, an alien pencil, steal anything so you have bragging rights afterwards.
You can prove this actually happened.
That's right. So I think they're out there because we have discovered 4,000 planets going around other stars. On average, get this, on average, every single star you see at night has a planet going around it. On average, 100% of the stars you see at night have a planet going around it, and a fraction of them are Earth-like. So I think, we have twins out there, twins of the Earth. When you go home tonight, look out in the night sky, somebody is looking back.
Should be a clear night as well. If we do detect signs of life beyond Earth, especially intelligent life, how will that change us?
Oh, it'll change us completely. I'll stick my neck out. I think in this century we'll pick up a radio transmission, we'll eavesdrop on some communication between alien civilizations. Now, are they going to land on the White House lawn and announce their existence?
Probably.
I don't think so. If you're in the forest, do you go to the squirrels and deer and try to talk to them? Well, at first, but eventually you get bored because they don't talk back. In the same way, I think aliens will land on the Earth and kind of get bored with us because we have nothing to offer them. If you see an anthill, do you go down to the ants and say, I bring you trinkets, I bring you beads, I give you nuclear energy, take me to your ant queen, or maybe you want to step on a few of them. So I think if they're that advanced, we're not on the radar screen.
Not just yet. All right.
The progressive development of man is vitally dependent on invention. It is the most important product of his creative brain. Its ultimate purpose is the complete mastery of mind over the material world, the harnessing of the forces of nature to human needs. This is the difficult task of the inventor, who is often misunderstood and unrewarded. But he finds ample compensation in the pleasing exercises of his powers and in the knowledge of being one of that exceptionally privileged class without whom the race would have long ago perished in the bitter struggle against the pitiless elements.
Your timeline potentially to go to the moon or Mars, and you said, did you say as soon as next year? Can you quantify that? Then I had my real question. I'm just doing Chris's work here.
Sure, yeah.
But
yeah. Well, by Hopper tests, I mean, kind of like we had the Grasshopper program for Falcon 9, where we just add the rocket, take off and land in Texas, at our Texas test site. So that would be, we'll either do that at our South Texas launch site near Brownsville, or do ship to ship. We're not sure yet whether ship to ship or Brownsville, but most likely it's going to happen at our Brownsville location because we've got a lot of land with nobody around. So if it blows up, it's cool. But by Hopper test, I mean it'll go up, several miles and then come down. The ship is capable of a single stage to orbit if you fully load the tanks. So we'll do flights of increasing complexity. We really want to test the heat shield material. Something like fly out, turn around, accelerate back real hard, and come in hot. To test the heat shield, because we want to have a highly reusable heat shield that's capable of absorbing the heat from interplanetary entry velocities. So it's really tricky.
The potential to go to Moon or Mars. What's your timeline there?
Yeah. So there are a lot of uncertainties on this program, but it is going to be our focus after now we're almost done with Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. We're going to level off, as I said, at Block 5 of version 5. So there won't be any more major versions of Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy. Dragon is also going to level off at Dragon version 2. There might be like point releases, 5.1 or Dragon 2.1 or something like that. But most of our engineering resources will be dedicated to VFR. And so I think that will make things go quite quickly. The ship part is by far the hardest because that's going to come in from supraorbital velocities like Mars transfer velocities, Moon transfer velocities. These are way harder than coming in from Earth orbit. There's some of the heating things that scale to the 8th power, which I didn't think realized there's anything that scales to the 8th power. But it turns out reentry, certain elements of reentry heating scale to the 8th. So just testing that chip out is the real tricky part. The booster, I think, I don't want to get complacent, but I think we understand reusable boosters. Reusable spaceships that can land propulsively, that's harder. So we're starting with the hard part first. I don't know, I think it's conceivable that we do our first test flight in 3 or 4 years of a full-up orbital test flight, including the booster. Oh, no, we'd go to Earth orbit first. But it would be capable of going to the moon shortly thereafter. It's designed to do that.
Elon, we want to be...
The best way to optimize the cost per unit mass to Mars and back is to use an all-methane system, or technically deep cryomethalyze. So those are the four elements that need to be achieved. Whatever architecture, whatever system is designed, whether by SpaceX or anyone, we think these are the 4 features that need to be addressed in order for the system to really achieve a low cost per ton to the surface of Mars. And this is a simulation of the overall system. So what you saw there is really quite close to what we will actually build. It will look almost exactly what you saw, like what you saw. So this is not an artist's impression. These the simulation was actually made from the SpaceX engineering CAD models. So this is not, it's not just, well, this is what it might look like. This is what we plan to try to make it look like. So in the video, you got a sense for what the system architecture looks like. The rocket booster and the spaceship take off, loads the spaceship into orbit. The rocket booster then comes back. It comes back quite quickly, within about 20 minutes. And so it can actually launch the tanker version of the spacecraft, which is essentially the same as the spaceship, but filling up the unpressurized and pressurized cargo areas with propellant tanks. So they look almost identical. So this also helps lower the development cost, which obviously will not be small. And then the propellant tanker goes up, and it'll go up multiple times, so anywhere from 3 to 5 times to fill the tanks of the spaceship in orbit. And then once the tanks are full, the cargo has been transferred, and we reach the Mars rendezvous timing, which, as mentioned, is roughly every 26 months. That's when the ship would depart. Now, over time, there would be many spaceships. You'd ultimately have, I think, upwards of 1,000 or more spaceships waiting in orbit. And so the Mars Colonial Fleet would depart en masse. They're kind of like Battlestar Galactica. You've seen that thing. That's a good show. So a bit like that. But it actually makes sense to load the spaceships into orbit because you've got 2 years to do so, and then make frequent use of the booster and the tanker to get really heavy reuse out of those. And then with the spaceship, you get less reuse because you have to say, well, how long is it going to last? Well, maybe 30 years. So that might be 12 to maybe 15 flights of the spaceship at most. So you really want to maximize the cargo of the spaceship and reuse the booster and the tanker a lot. So anyways, the ship goes to Mars, gets replenished, and then returns to Earth.
The big story today concerns a milestone in the exploration of outer space. Private enterprise, not taxpayers' money. Private enterprise sent the Falcon Heavy rocket into outer space. A moon rocket. A rocket that is the largest rocket on the planet Earth. The Falcon Heavy is capable of sending astronauts to the moon and then perhaps on to Mars. And some people think that we could be entering a new era. A golden age in space exploration after a 50-year gap. And then we're going to say a few things about medicine. It turns out that scientists at the University of Pennsylvania have created a memory chip. A chip that could be used for epileptics and people with Parkinson's disease to increase memory by 15%. And the question is, one day, will we have a memory chip where you simply push a button and memories come flooding into our brain? And then we'll say a few things about earthquakes. I'll be speaking in Berkeley in a few weeks on a book tour, and it turns out that there's a chance of a gigantic earthquake slicing Berkeley and Oakland in half, perhaps 1 in 3. A 30% chance that perhaps we'll have a gigantic earthquake in the East Bay in the next 30 years. So we'll be talking about the potential of an earthquake. And as I mentioned before, I'll be on a book tour. I have a new book coming out called The Future of Humanity. How about the future of the space program? What does it mean when we go back to the moon starting next year? That's right, December 2019. NASA expects to send the SLS booster rocket with the Orion space capsule to the moon, first in an unmanned launch, and then afterwards astronauts will return back to the moon. And then Elon Musk, riding on the tide of success from his Falcon Heavy rocket, well, he wants to go to Mars.
That's right. He wants to go to Mars perhaps within 10, 15 years using mainly private funding. And so we're witnessing perhaps a new age in the exploration of space. Well, let's just jump right into some of the top stories of the past week. The big story today is that Elon Musk, a billionaire, the driving force behind SpaceX, Tesla Motors, and PayPal, well, he created with his own funds a gigantic booster rocket, in fact, the biggest rocket on the planet Earth at the present time, the Falcon Heavy, and it had a successful launch. Now, the payload, of course, was a dummy payload because this was just a test, and he put his own Tesla Roadster inside the rocket. And so now, for the first time in history, we have a sports car that is in orbit. And who knows, maybe sometimes millions of years in the future, aliens from outer space will intercept it and see what Earthlings used to drive on the highway. So it is a milestone in the history of space exploration because it means that costs are going down. In 1966, the cost of NASA was enormous at the height of the Cold War and the height of the space race. It turns out that the NASA budget in 1966 was about 5% of the federal budget. Now, that is unsustainable. And of course, in the 1970s, funding for NASA collapsed. And that was the end of the moon program. But now we have several factors coming into play. But the economics of space travel have been changing dramatically. Recently, just a few years ago, the Indians sent a probe to Mars on the first try. This is the first time it's happened that a developing nation has been able to send a probe to the planet Mars on the first try. And the Chinese, not to be outdone, have laid out a program to put a space station in space and then plant the Chinese flag on the moon. NASA, of course, is not too far behind. NASA not just wants to go to the moon, but to create a lunar orbiter. That's right. NASA wants to create a lunar orbiter like the space station that'll give us a permanent presence in outer space. From that lunar orbiter, NASA wants to create a Mars ship. That's right, a gigantic rocket using ion engines that'll take 4 astronauts all the way to the planet Mars. When? Well, first of all, starting next year, December 2019, NASA wants to send an unmanned probe around the moon as a practice mission. In 2022, NASA wants to send astronauts back to the moon after a 50-year gap. And then sometime in the mid-2030s, NASA wants to go on to Mars. Of course, Elon Musk, using private funds, has his own time frame. He also hopes to get some NASA money for a Mars ship that perhaps will reach Mars maybe 10 years before NASA does. And so we may have a traffic jam. Eventually, we may have a traffic jam over Mars, given the fact that Silicon Valley billionaires have their own timetable. And speaking about Silicon Valley billionaires, Jeff Bezos of Amazon.com, well, he's created his own rocket base in Texas. That's right. He was too impatient to wait for rockets to be launched from Cape Canaveral, so he created his own launch pad in Texas and his own rockets. He has a fleet of rockets that, first of all, will take tourists into outer space and then into orbit and finally onto the moon. And he also has a vision of the future. For Elon Musk, he wants to create a multi-planet species. He says it is simply too dangerous to put life on one planet. We need an insurance policy. We need to make sure that humanity can survive even if there's a catastrophe that hits the planet Earth. That's the vision given to us by Elon Musk, a vision that, of course, comes to us from many science fiction writers like Isaac Asimov and scientists like Carl Sagan. However, Jeff Bezos has a different vision. His vision is, when you look at all the polluting plants on the planet Earth, well, why not put them in outer space? Why not take all the heavy machinery and all the pollution, put them in outer space, and make the Earth into a park? So this, for the same reason that in cities, we try to concentrate the industrial areas in one place and we try to make the center of the city into a park, why not make the Earth into a park? Already, Jeff Bezos has stated that he wants to create a delivery system to the moon. Just like Amazon.com can deliver products right to your doorstep, he wants to create a similar system that'll take hardware between the Earth and the moon. Well, the next step, as I mentioned before, is the planet Mars. Now, it's not going to be an easy journey. It only took 3 days. That's a hop, skip, and a jump. 3 days to go from the Earth to the moon. However, it's going to take 2 years to go to the planet Mars. And so we're talking about a major commitment of funds, a major commitment of space hardware to go to Mars. First, it'll take about 9 months to reach the red planet. And once we're on Mars, we have to do experiments and wait for the stars to line up for the return journey. And then we come back with another 9-month journey. And when you add up all the months in space, it turns out it's about 2 years. Now, that's an awful long time, given the fact that the world's record for being in orbit continuously is just a little bit over 1 year. And that was set by Commander Polyakov of Russia. And when he came back to the Earth after 1 year of weightlessness, he could barely crawl like a bug. There was so much atrophy of his muscles that he couldn't even walk when he got out of the space capsule. That means that our Martian astronauts are going to have to exercise all the time. Now, what do we do when we get there? We're talking about perhaps a permanent presence on Mars. First of all, there are lava tubes on Mars that are naturally forming, caves formed by ancient volcanoes, and they can be used as a basis for a Mars base. Because Mars is, well, it's radioactive. There's a lot of radiation from the sun and cosmic rays from outer space, and we have to shield our astronauts from the hazards of radiation. We should also point out that it's very cold on Mars, and the atmosphere is very thin. The atmosphere is only 1% the atmospheric pressure found on the planet Earth, and you can't breathe that atmosphere because it's carbon dioxide. So the next big step would be the terraforming of Mars. That is, taking Mars as a frozen desert, injecting, for example, methane gas to speed up a greenhouse effect to heat up Mars, and then perhaps have gigantic solar mirrors to melt the polar ice caps. This, of course, is science fiction, and it may take decades before we can do this, but it does mean that at some point we may be able to have a self-sustaining colony on Mars. For example, algae and plants. You can genetically modify algae and plants so they can thrive in the Martian atmosphere. Plants, of course, love carbon dioxide. They would have to be genetically modified so they can live in the very cold atmosphere of Mars. And then it may be possible to create self-sustaining agriculture, that is, plants and food stocks that are grown indigenously on the red planet. Well, what about the pros and cons? What about the costs? What about the dangers? What about the benefits of all this? Find out more by getting a copy of my latest book, The Future of Humanity, which gets into the pros and cons of the space program and the vision given to us by these space-age pioneers who are opening up their checkbooks in order to explore outer space. Also, speaking about the Earth and Mars, we should say something about earthquakes. That's right. It seems that recently we've had a series of earthquakes in Japan, in the Philippines, in Taiwan. And some people say, is there a link between all these different earthquakes? Well, yes and no. They're all part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, which extends from Chile up to the coast of Mexico, through California, up to Alaska, into Japan, down into the Philippines. And when you get a chart and you map all these different earthquakes, you find that most of them lie along the Pacific Ring of Fire. Now, is there a link between them? Probably not. because the Pacific Ring of Fire in turn consists of many short segments, fault lines, and one fault line does not necessarily trigger another fault line. But hey, we're still children when it comes to understanding the dynamics of earthquakes and whether or not one earthquake could in principle set off another. At the present time, the consensus is probably no, but who knows, time will tell. Well, here's a new news story coming from Berkeley, where I'm going to be next month on a book tour. It turns out that the Hayward Fault goes right underneath the football stadium. In fact, I used to go there often when I was a PhD student at Berkeley years ago, and the stadium is slowly being ripped apart. That's right. The stadium sits on top of a fault line, and the Berkeley Stadium is, in fact, being slowly ripped apart. Well, here's a new study that came out just a few days ago. The probability of a major earthquake along the Hayward Fault is 1 in 3 over a 30-year period, which means that within the lifetime of many of the people listening to this radio program, we're going to see major catastrophes in California. First of all, we should point out that perhaps the weakest link in the whole chain is the San Andreas Fault north of San Francisco. That is one of the weakest links in the chain. But of course, we have the San Andreas Fault that goes right through the Bay Area, and an offshoot, the Hayward Fault, that goes underneath the University of California at Berkeley, where I got my PhD so many years ago. So now we can begin to calculate the chances of these earthquakes. We're getting better at this. However, it's still black magic trying to predict when the big one will take place. But the consensus that I get by talking to seismologists and by reading their studies is that we are overdue. That's right. We are overdue for another big one. Not just one, but perhaps several. So in other words, a word to the wise, in the lifetime of many of the people listening to this radio show, you may see the big one. You may see parts of Los Angeles, parts of San Francisco and the Bay Area, parts of Berkeley ripped apart by an earthquake exceeding 7.0 on the Richter scale. For example, the Hayward Fault last sustained a major earthquake in 1868. And so memories are short. We have no memories of these gigantic earthquakes that took place in the 1800s, and we've been lulled to sleep because we only had the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, but hardly another big one on that scale. But it's inevitable. It's inevitable that we're going to have not one, but perhaps several big ones in California. Think about that.
John Taylor, Director of Communications for SpaceX. Joining us to provide a status on the mission, Elon Musk, SpaceX CEO and lead designer. Elon?
Today, I'm really excited about today. I'm really proud of the SpaceX team. They've done an incredible job of creating what they believe is the most advanced rocket in the world, the biggest rocket in the world. I'm still trying to tell everything that happened because it seems surreal to me. I had this image of just a giant explosion on the pad with, that wheel bouncing down the road. And it has a logo landing somewhere. But fortunately, that's not what happened. The mission since it's on really as well as one could was being centrally centered for. And most of these side reaches, if you guys are kidding, we still at the land. That was epic. I think that's probably the most exciting thing I've ever seen, literally, ever. And then the Air Corps obviously did land on direction, but we're showing that. And we really get the issue, but I think it didn't have enough propellant to relight the all three engines. Sorry, not what's called TTAP, triethyl triethyl boron. It's used to light the engines. So I believe that the center one that I believe and the outer two did not. And that was not enough to slow the pace down. Apparently it hit 400 miles an hour. And took out two of the engines in production. So if we got the footage, that sounds like some pretty fun footage. So if the cameras didn't get blown up as well, then we'll put that out for real. But that's the idea. We weren't going to reuse that center core anyway. Or the two side boosters. The side boosters will figure out someplace to put them, but since they're not Block 5 or version 5, we weren't planning on reusing any of the cores. The upper stage things have worked perfectly so far. The two buttons were executed correctly, and they will see if the upper stage avionics survive quite an arduous trip through the Van Allen belts. Normally, a stage will pass very quickly through the Van Allen belts. Here it's essentially dwelling for several hours. And then it's going to do a restart, deplete its propellant, and go to transloss ejection, which is basically very minor. So it has plenty of propellant to deplete the transloss ejection, assuming that the fuel doesn't freeze and the oxygen doesn't blow and the electronics don't get fried. So those are the issues. We'll find out in a few hours if that was successful. I think there's anything else I know that's worth mentioning. I went out to the landing zone, took a look at the side boosters. They look in really good condition. So they're both reflyable, although as I said, they're combination of version 3 and version 4. So we're only going to be reflying really version 5 at this point. That launches shortly, and that'll be our mainstay. We'll stick to version 5 for the Falcon architecture. We don't expect to have a version 6. All right, any questions that I haven't answered? I'll do my best to answer them, but not sure if I have the information yet, but I'll try. Teachers, I guess, told me like crazy things can come true. Because he'd said like I didn't really think this would work. Because when I see the rocket lift off, I see like 1,000 things that could not work, and it's amazing when they do. And I was really seeing the two boosters land synchronized, really just like the simulation. I mean, it makes me think like really that could be quite a scalable approach. Just coming in, landing, taking off, landing, doing many flights per day. So I think it gives me a lot of faith for our next architecture, the sort of the interplanetary spaceship. You have different names for it, but BFR is kind of the code name. And it gives me confidence that BFR is really quite workable. I was actually looking at the side boosters and like, they're pretty big, 16 stories tall, 60-foot leg span. But we need to be way bigger than that. So I think it's given me a lot of confidence that we can make the BFR design work. Yeah, it's. I have a tremendous confidence, obviously, in the SpaceX team. So I think we can really do this a lot, and keep advancing the technology to achieve full and rapid reusability. But we didn't really test any of those materials for, is it space hardened or whatever, So it just has the same seats that like a normal car has. It's just literally a normal car in space, which I kind of like the absurdity of that. And if you look closely, on the dashboard, there's a tiny roadster with a tiny spaceman. So, because Hot Wheels made a Hot Wheels Roadster, and a friend of mine suggested, "Hey, why don't you put that Hot Wheels Roadster with a tiny spaceman on the, in the car too?" I'm like, that'd be cool. Sure. So we did that. I mean, it's kind of silly and fun, but I think that's, silly fun things are important. And normally for a new rocket, they'd launch like a block of concrete or something like that. I mean, that's so boring. And I think that's just the imagery of it is something that's going to get people excited around the world. And it's still tripping me out. I mean, I'm tripping balls here. Yeah, the great thing is, so Falcon Heavy opens up a new class of payload. So it can launch more than twice as much payload as any other rocket in the world. So it's kind of up to customers what they might want to launch. But it can launch things direct to Pluto and beyond. No stop needed. You don't even need like a gravity assist or anything. And launch giant satellites. It can do anything you want. You could send people back to the moon with a bunch of, if you did a bunch of launches of Falcon Heavy and did an orbital refilling. The 2 or 3 Falcon Heavies, would equal the payload of a Saturn V. But I wouldn't recommend doing that because I think the new architecture, BFR architecture, is the way to go. But I think it's going to open up a sense of possibility. I think it's going to encourage other companies and countries to say, hey, if SpaceX, which is a commercial company, can do this, and nobody paid for Falcon Heavy, it was paid for with internal funds, then they could do it too. So I think it's going to encourage other countries and companies to raise their sights and say, hey, we can do bigger and better, which is great. We want a new space race. But we have a number of commercial customers for Falcon Heavy. So I think, I really don't think it's going to be in any way an impediment to acceptance of national security missions. Because we'll be doing several Falcon Heavy missions, flights per year. So let's say if there's a big national security satellite that's due for launch in 3 or 4 years, and we probably have like a dozen or more launches done by then. So it won't really, I don't think there'll be a launch number that's an inhibitor on national security stuff. And then we've got the STP mission that's coming up, which is another test mission. That'll go on where everything's on Block 5, version 5 of the rocket. And then we'll be launching version 5, Block 5 single stick in a couple months. So I think it's hopefully smooth sailing for qualification for national security missions. Our investment to date, probably a lot more than I'd like to admit. We try to cancel the Falcon Heavy program 3 times at SpaceX. Because it's like, man, this is way harder than we thought. Because the initial idea was just like, you stick on 2 first stages of side boosters, how hard can it be? It's like, it's way hard. We had to redesign the center core completely. We had to redesign the grid fins, because it's a long story, but if you've got a nose cone on the end of at the end of the booster instead of a cylinder, you lose control authority. Because if you've got a cylinder, you can kind of bounce the air off of the rocket, and you get like 50% or more increased control authority if you've got a cylindrical section instead of an O-drive section at the end of the booster. So we had to redesign the grid fins, redesign the control system, massively redesign the thrust structure at the base to take way more load. That center booster's got to deal with over 1 million pounds of load coming in combined from the side boosters. So it ends up being heavier. So the center core is basically a complete redesign. And even the side boosters, there's a pretty large number of parts that change. And then the launch site itself needs to change a lot. I'm guessing our total investment is over $500 million. Probably more. Yeah.
I'd like to take some questions from the phone. I think the first one up is...
I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I think, it's kind of a fun thing, and I sure hope that next burn works, by the way. We're not, we'll know in a few hours.
Now we're going to go back to the room, if that's okay. So,
Or do ship to ship. We're not sure yet whether ship to ship or Brownsville, but most likely it's going to happen at our Brownsville location because we've got a lot of land with nobody around. So if it blows up, it's cool. But by hopper test, I mean it'll go up, several miles and then come down. The ship is capable of a single stage to orbit if you fully load the tanks. So we'll do flights of increasing complexity. We really want to test the heat shield material. Something like fly out, turn around, accelerate back real hard, and come in hot to test the heat shield. Because we want to have a highly reusable heat shield that's capable of absorbing the heat from interplanetary entry velocities. There are a lot of uncertainties on this program, but it is going to be our focus after now we're almost done with Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. We're going to level off, as I said, at Block 5 of version 5. So there won't be any more major versions of Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy. Dragon is also going to level off at Dragon version 2. There might be like point releases, 5.1 or Dragon 2.1 or something like that. But most of our engineering resources will be dedicated to VFR, and so I think that will make things go quite quickly, because that's going to come in from supraorbital velocities like Mars transfer velocities, Moon transfer velocities. These are way harder than coming in from Earth orbit. There's some of the heating things that scale to the 8th power, which I didn't think realized there was anything that scales to the 8th power. But it turns out certain elements of re-entry heating scale to the 8th. So just testing that chip out is the real tricky part. The booster, I think, I don't want to get complacent, but I think we understand reusable boosters. Reusable spaceships that can land propulsively, that's harder. So we're starting with the hard part first. I don't know, I think it's conceivable that we do our first test flight in 3 or 4 years of a full up orbital test flight, including the booster. But it would be capable of going to the moon shortly thereafter. Because I'm pretty sure we'll serve fairing recovery in the next 6 months. But it turns out, like, you pop the parachute in the fairing, you've got this giant, awkward thing. It tends to interfere with the airflow on the parachute, and gets all twisty, and obviously it was a low priority too. Also, we have fairing version 2, which is that's the important one that we want to recover. So even if we recovered fairing version 1, that wouldn't be, we wouldn't be reflying it in the future. So fairing 2 and recovery, that's very important. And my guess is next 6 months we figure out fairing recovery. And we've got a special boat to catch the fairing. It's like a catcher's mitt. It's like a giant catcher's mitt in boat form. So going to run around and catch the fairing. Actually, it's kind of fun. I think we might be able to do the same thing with Dragon. So unless, if NASA wants us to, we could try to catch Dragon. Literally, it's just meant for the fairing, but it would work on Dragon too.
In the room?
Actually, in terms of company priorities, obviously mission assurance is always number one as a priority, but then the priority used to be Falcon 9 Block 5. And then a month ago, I said absolute priority is Crew Dragon. So we're pretty much done with Falcon 9 Block 5 or version 5. Pretty much almost done with Falcon Heavy. There's a few tweaks that would occur with Falcon Heavy Block 5, but they're minor. And so it's all hands on deck for Crew Dragon. And our goal is to, we're aspiring to fly Crew to orbit at the end of this year. That's our goal. I think the hardware will be ready. And so it's all hands on deck for Crew Dragon. And our goal is to, we're aspiring to fly Crew to orbit at the end of this year. Yeah, so the center core is a special build. The side boosters, we can reuse existing Falcon 9s, but we need to just replace the interstage with a nose cone. And it needs to use the upgraded titanium grid fins, which are sweet. Those worked out real well. I'm really happy about those. In fact, I'm glad we got the side boosters back, because they had the titanium grid fins and the center core didn't. So if I was to pick anyone, I would have picked the side boosters. I'd pick the center core to explode. So that would be like the least. Yeah, those freaking grid fins they're super expensive, and yeah, no, it definitely works though. You can just like jump in a vacuum chamber with it, and it's fine.
Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
All right, thanks everyone. I've had a good time. Lots more excitement coming.
We're doing what we can to have the future be as good as possible, to be inspired by what is likely to happen, and to look forward to the next day. So that's what really drives me is trying to figure out how to make sure that things are great and going to be so, and that's the underlying principle behind Tesla and SpaceX. Is that I think it's pretty important that we accelerate the transition to sustainable generation and consumption of energy. It's inevitable, but it matters if it happens sooner or later. And then SpaceX is about helping make life multiplanetary and doing what we can to continue the dream of Apollo and ultimately make a contribution to life becoming multiplanetary.
Well, let's talk a little more about that. I think everyone's very interested in that when you say making life multiplanetary.
Yeah, that's exciting.
It is exciting. So what's your vision there?
I think, particularly for Americans, like think about America is a nation of explorers. People came here from other parts of the world. They, chose to give up the known in favor of the unknown. So I think exploration, I think the United States is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. So that's why it appeals to Americans so much. You can see this when, say, there was a shuttle tragedy and 7 people died, and that's terrible, but a lot of people die all the time. But why do we care so much? Because it was the dream of exploration that was dying along with those people. That's why.
No, and I'm one of those, and probably like many of you remember exactly where you were when that tragedy happened. So you have 30 plus governors here today, and we're very excited about your willingness to be with us. And you hopefully heard me talk a little bit about my initiative, which is being ahead of the curve. What do you tell us as governors? What should we be thinking about in terms of innovation and developing public policy for the future?
Well, sure is important to get the rules right. It's sort of, in terms of legislative and executive actions, it's sort of like, think of, say, like professional sports or something. If you don't have the rules right, if there isn't, if the game isn't set up properly, it's not going to be a good game. So it's real important to get the rules right. Now, I think it's worth noting that I think still in the United States the rules are still better than anywhere else. It's very easy to put something in place which is an inhibitor to innovation without realizing it. So in terms of the regulatory environment, it's always important to bear in mind that regulations are immortal, and they never die unless somebody actually goes and kills them, and then they get a lot of momentum. So a lot of times regulations can be put in place for all the right reasons, but then nobody goes back and gets rid of them afterwards when they no longer make sense. And there used to be a rule in the early days when people were concerned about automobiles, because that was a pretty scary thing, see a carriage just going wrong by itself. Mm-hmm. You never know what those things might do. So there were like rules where you had to, in a lot of states, where you had to carry a lantern in front of the automobile. And it had to be like 100 paces ahead of the automobile. There had to be someone with a lantern on a pole. I'm like, okay. But you should really get rid of that regulation. And they did, because it would really be awkward. So just regulations, even if done correctly and being right at the time, it's always important to go back and scrub those, periodically to make sure they're still sensible and they're still serving the greater good. I think in terms of tax structure, what is economically incented and what is not economically incented, just make sure that the incentive structure is correct. I think I'm saying just totally common sense things here. But it's economics 101. Whatever you incent will happen. So if you incent one thing, that thing will tend to happen more than the other thing. If you incent another thing, that thing will happen. And so the economics should favor innovation. And this is particularly important to protect small to medium-sized companies, because it's sort of like trying to grow a tree in a forest. Like, it's real hard for a new company to grow. When it's just a seedling or a sapling, it needs a lot more protection than if it's a giant redwood or something like that. So very important to give support to small and small to medium-sized companies on the innovation front. They're the ones that need it more than big companies. And I think at this point Tesla is almost a big company, biggish company anyway. So I'd favor, supporting smaller companies than Tesla, relatively speaking.
What would your response be? Because there are critics out there with regard to incentives, mm-hmm. and that, sure. And Tesla has been, and I can speak from experience, the beneficiary of incentives, economic mm-hmm. incentives, with regard to the Gigafactory.
Sure.
What would you tell those people?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, as you know, those incentives were a little overstated. In the case of the Gigafactory, it's a $5 billion capital investment to get that factory going. And I didn't actually know this until, by the way, I didn't know this until we did the press conference. Actually, that over 20 years, the Nevada incentives added up to $1.3 billion. I actually didn't even know this. But it's,
now he's telling. Okay, go ahead.
Literally, I learned it at the press conference. I'm like, really? No, but I mean, the thing is that they took what added up over 20 years and made it sound like Nevada was writing us a $1.3 billion check. And I'm still waiting for that check. Did it get lost in the mail? I don't know. So, but this is the way the press works, of course. So, now if you divide 1.3 billion by 20, okay, then it's like, okay, Tesla's on average receives a sort of a tax. It's basically sales and use tax abatement is what it amounts to. So Tesla gets we get on the order of 50 to 60 million of sales and use tax abatement divided over 20 years. But this is for something which has a $5 billion capital cost just to get going, and then would have to generate about $100 billion over that period of time to achieve a $1.3 billion tax benefit. So essentially, it's a little over 1% over that period of time, and that's great, okay. But it's not, it's not the way it was characterized in the press. Because if it's put in the proper context, it sounds like, okay, well, that's neat, It's about 5% helpful on setting up the factory and about 1% helpful over the next 20 years. Cool. That actually sounds pretty reasonable. So that was helpful, but there are a lot of other factors as well. We actually had slightly bigger incentive packages from some other states that were offered, but we factored in how quickly could we get the Gigafactory into operation, what were the risks associated with that progress, what would be the logistics costs over time of transferring battery packs and powertrains to a vehicle factory in California, and all of those factors weighed together is what led us to make the decision in favor of Nevada. And working with your team was great. It was very forward-leaning. A big part was also just like making sure you feel really welcome, within the state. That's sort of what led us to make the decision for the Gigafactory, and then we have another factory in New York doing solar panels. Also, actually, will be the biggest solar panel producer in North America when it's done. And then we expect to establish probably at least 2 or 3 more gigafactories in the U.S. in the next several years, as well as a couple overseas. But the overall objective of Tesla is really what set of actions can we take to accelerate the advent of sustainable production and consumption of energy. I think the sort of the way I would assess the historic good of Tesla is in terms of how many years of acceleration was it, and if we can accelerate sustainable energy by 10 years, I would consider that to be a great success. Even if it was only 5 years, that would still be pretty good. That's the overarching optimization.
So you've talked about interplanetary travel and sustainable energy and the vehicles a little bit. What would you want things to look like in 5 to 10 years associated with energy? Sure. And with autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles?
Well, I think things are going to grow exponentially. So there's a big difference between 5 and 10 years. My guess is, probably in 10 years, more than a half of new vehicle production is electric in the United States. And China's probably going to be ahead of that because China's been super pro-EV. I don't think a lot of people know this, but China's environmental policies are way ahead of the U.S. Like their mandate for renewable energy far exceeds the U.S. I think sometimes people are under the impression that China is either dragging their feet or somehow behind the U.S. in terms of sustainable energy promotion, but they're by far the most aggressive on Earth. It's crazy. I mean, like, in fact, a coalition of Chinese car manufacturers just wrote the Chinese government to beg for them to slow down the mandate. Because it's like too much. They need to make 8% electric vehicles, I think, like next year or in 2 years or something. They can't physically do it. So China's by far the most aggressive on electric vehicles and solar. But that's a common misperception that they're not. There's one Google search away to figure this out, by the way. It's really pretty easy. So. And in 10 years, man, I think, so half of all production, I think, will be EV. I think almost all cars produced will be autonomous in 10 years. Almost all. It will be rare to find one that is not in 10 years. That's going to be a huge transformation. Now, the thing to bear in mind, though, is that new vehicle production is only about 5% the size of the vehicle fleet. So you think about how long does a car or truck last, and they last 15 to 20 years, so before they're finally scrapped. So new vehicle production is only roughly at most 1/15 of the fleet size. So even when new vehicle production, say, switches over to electric or to autonomous, that still means the vast majority of the fleet on the roads is not. It'll take another, 5 to 10 years before that becomes the majority of the fleet becomes EV or autonomous. But if you were to say go out 20 years, overwhelmingly things are electric, autonomous, overwhelmingly.
Fully autonomous?
Fully autonomous.
So no one will have to touch the steering wheel if there is one?
There will not be a steering wheel. In 20 years, it will be like having a horse. People have horses, which is cool. But
so having a regular car will be like having a horse. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. And there will be people that have non-autonomous cars, like people have horses. It just would be unusual to use that as a mode of transport.
Yes, all right. Now, let's talk about the energy piece and rooftop solar and storage.
So first of all, it's important to appreciate that the Earth is almost entirely solar powered today, in the sense that the sun is the only thing that keeps us from being at roughly the temperature of cosmic background radiation, which is 3 degrees above absolute zero. If it wasn't for a sun, we'd be a frozen dark ice bowl. And the amount of energy that hits the sun, that reaches us from the sun, is tremendous. It's 99% plus of all energy that Earth has. Then there's this energy we need to use to run civilization, which to us is big, but compared to the amount of energy that reaches us from the sun is tiny. So it's very easy. Like, it actually doesn't take much. If you wanted to power the entire United States with solar panels, it would take a fairly small corner of Nevada, Texas, Utah, anywhere. You only need about 100 miles by 100 miles of solar panels to power the entire United States. And then the batteries you need to store that energy to make sure you have 24/7 power is 1 mile by 1 mile. One square mile. That's it. Mm-hmm. I showed the graph of or image of this where this is what 100 miles by 100 miles looks like. It's like a little square on the U.S. map. And then there's a little pixel inside there, and that's the size of the battery pack that you need to support that. Real tiny.
So, Will, you talked about 20 years from now, some people will still be using horses or
It won't be zero.
yeah. But
It's too rare.
So what will the energy piece look like? I mean, what will there be transmission lines? Will there be a need?
Yeah, I think there's use of energy is roughly divided into 3 areas. And they're more or less equal at a high level. There's about a third of energy is used for transportation of various kinds. About a third is used for electricity. About a third is used for heating. So if you want to have, and then of the electricity production, call it, something on the order of 10%, depending upon how you count it, is renewable. Maybe 15% today. So that means that there's a massive amount of solar that would need to be produced and connected in order to be fully sustainable. Because fully sustainable means you're tackling transport, non-renewable electricity generation, and heating. So that means there will need to be a combination of utility scale solar and rooftop scale solar combined with wind, geothermal, hydro, probably some nuclear for a while, in order to transition to a sustainable situation. Which means, really, for the most part, massive growth in solar. And it's going to be important to have rooftop solar in neighborhoods because otherwise there'll need to be massive new transmission lines built. And people do not like having transmission lines go through the neighborhood. They really don't like that. And I agree. So you want to have some localized energy production combined with utility. So you want rooftop solar, utility solar, and that's really going to be the solution from a physics standpoint. That I can't see any other way to really do it. People talk a lot about fusion and all that, but the sun is a giant fusion reactor in the sky, and it's really reliable. It comes up every day. So if it doesn't, we've got bigger problems.
Somebody asked me to ask you this. We talked about workforce today, but they asked me, are robots going to take our jobs, everybody's jobs in the future? Or how much do you see artificial intelligence coming into the workplace?
Well, first of all, I think on the artificial intelligence front, I have exposure to the very most cutting edge AI. And I think people should be really concerned about it. I keep sounding the alarm bell, but until people see like robots going down the street killing people, like they don't know how to react, because it seems so ethereal. And I think we should be really concerned about AI, and I think we should. AI is a rare case where I think we need to be proactive in regulation instead of reactive. Because I think by the time we are reactive in AI regulation, it's too late. And normally the way regulations are set up is that a whole bunch of bad things happen, there's a public outcry, and then after many years, a regulatory agency is set up to regulate that industry. And there's a bunch of opposition from companies who don't like being told what to do by regulators. Anyway, it takes forever. That in the past has been bad, but not something which represented a fundamental risk to the existence of civilization. AI is a fundamental risk to the existence of human civilization. In a way that car accidents, airplane crashes, faulty drugs, or bad food were not. They were harmful to a set of individuals within society, of course, but they were not harmful to society as a whole. AI is a fundamental existential risk for human civilization, and I don't think people fully appreciate that.
it's not fun being regulated. It's not, it can be pretty irksome. But, in the car business, we get regulated by Department of Transport, by EPA, and a bunch of others. And there's regulatory agencies in every country. In space, we get regulated by FAA. But if you ask the average person, hey, do you want to get rid of the FAA and just like take a chance on manufacturers not cutting corners on the aircraft because profits were down that quarter? I was like, hell no. That sounds terrible. So, I think even people who are pretty extremely like libertarian free market, they'd be like, yeah, we should probably have somebody keeping an eye on the aircraft companies, making sure they build a good aircraft and good cars and that kind of thing. So, I think there's a role for regulators. That's very important. And I'm against overregulation for sure. But man, I think we better get on that with AI pronto. So there'll certainly be a lot of job disruption. Because what's going to happen is robots will be able to do everything better than us. I'm including, all of us, Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to do about this. This is really like the scariest problem to me, I'll tell you. So I really think we need government regulation here, just because this is, ensuring the public good is served. Because you've got companies that are racing, they kind of have to race to build AI, or they're going to be made uncompetitive. Essentially, if your competitor is racing to build AI and you don't, they will crush you. So then you're like, we don't want to be crushed. So, I guess we need to build it too. That's where you need the regulators to come in and say, hey guys, you all need to really, just pause and make sure this is safe. And like when it's cool and and the regulators are convinced that it's safe to proceed, then you can go. But otherwise, slow down. But you kind of need the regulators to do that for all the teams in the game. Otherwise the shareholders will be saying like, hey, why aren't you developing AI faster? Because your competitor is. I'm like, okay, we better do that. Anyway, so it's like, there's like something like 12% of jobs are transport. Transport will be one of the first things to go fully autonomous. But when I say everything, like the robots will be able to do everything, bar nothing.
Let's move back to you're rolling out the Model 3 this year, right? Mm-hmm. And how many orders? What is that going to look like? Yeah, it's going well on that front. We got I don't know more. I think like if somebody orders a Model 3 today, they'd only get it probably late next year. We just started production. Made the first production unit last week, and the thing that is not well appreciated about something about cars and any kind of new technology is how hard it is to do the manufacturing. It is vastly harder to do the manufacturing by a factor of 100, like 100, than to make one of something. Now, with maybe 50 or 60 people, we could make a prototype of practically anything in 6 months. Now to manufacture that thing, we need 5,000 people to spend 3 years, and that's considered really fast. So manufacturing does this kind of S-curve where it's excruciatingly slow at first, and then it grows exponentially. But people tend to extrapolate on a straight line. So if it's real slow at first, they say, oh, this is real slow, look at that. They're only going to make 5 cars a week forever. Like, nope. It'll be 10 cars a week, then 20 cars a week, then 40 cars a week, then 5,000 cars a week eventually. Just grows crazy fast.
So we're hoping to get to, something, like 5,000 cars a week by the end of the year.
Well, I wanted to give an opportunity for some of the governors to ask questions and perhaps some audience questions. I was told that you'd be willing to do
absolutely.
that.
Great.
So, governors, any questions for Elon? Governor Scott.
Well, thank you very much. We in Vermont have partnered with Tesla in terms of a power pack in our homes, and it's for $15 a day. You can rent this for 15 years, and it'll carry power as a backup generation device for 12 hours, and it's been really, really interesting from my perspective. But I'm curious about vehicles and where we're going in the future, or how far in the future do the cars themselves become the charging device, like the roof and deck lids and hood, or do the batteries get so efficient that you don't need that, and then you just power up for a week or something like that? Where are we going in the future with battery storage?
Yeah, I think the future is there's three legs to the stool. There's electric cars, there's a stationary battery pack, and solar power. With those three things, you can have a completely sustainable energy future. That's all that's needed. On the solar front, like I said, it's going to be a combination of rooftop solar and utility scale solar. You'll need both because of the enormous demand for electricity. And then one of the things that's been missing, I think, up till now is having rooftop solar that looks good and isn't that's where we got the solar glass roof that we're developing, and we're doing it in different styles so that it matches the aesthetics of a particular house or regional style. I think that's actually pretty important. But conventional flat panel solars for flat roofs and for commercial will be the way to go. But yeah, and putting solar panels on the car itself, not that helpful, because the actual surface area of the car is not very much, and cars are very often indoors, and so it's the least efficient place to put solar is on the car.
Just wondering about maybe a wrap of some sort. Does that make any sense in the future? Like a wrap of solar around either a building made of a solar panel or a wrap of a vehicle actually being the solar panel, but being the components of the vehicle itself?
I don't think so.
I'll scrap that idea.
No, it's just way better to put it on the roof, for sure. I really thought about this. I mean, really, and I pushed my team about, like, isn't there some way we could do it on the car? I mean, technically, if you have like some sort of transformer-like thing which will pop out of the trunk like a hard-top convertible and just like ratchet solar panels over the whole surface area of the car, extending like for the entire, say, square footage of a parking space, provided you're in the sun, that would be enough to generate about 20 to 30 miles a day of electricity, but that is for sure the expensive, difficult way to do it.
Governor Burgum.
Still thought about maybe we should, but.
Elon, thanks for being here. With your background in payment systems, you understand the important role of security and transactions. Now that you've got...
I think security is cybersecurity.
Yes, and in the vehicles you're building now are incredibly complex software systems. I mean, the car is really a rolling piece of software.
It is. It's like a laptop on wheels.
Yes. So share with us a little bit about your thoughts on cybersecurity and how we protect. You talked about protecting society when you've got a rolling fleet of...
I think one of the biggest risks for autonomous vehicles is somebody achieving a fleet-wide hack. In principle, if somebody was able to hack, say, all of the autonomous Teslas, they could say, I mean, just as a prank, they could say, like, send them all to Rhode Island from across the United States. And they'll be like, well, okay, that would be the end of Tesla. And there'll be a lot of angry people in Rhode Island, that's for sure. So we got to make super sure that that a fleet-wide hack is basically impossible, and that if people are in the car, that they have override authority on whatever the car is doing. So if the car is doing something wacky, you can press a button that no amount of software can override. That will ensure that you gain control of the vehicle and cut the link to the servers. So that's pretty fundamental. Within the car, we actually have, even if somebody gains access to the car, there are multiple subsystems within the car that also have specialized encryption. So the powertrain, for example, has specialized encryption. So even if somebody would gain access to the car, they cannot gain access to the powertrain or to the braking system. But it is my top concern from a security standpoint at Tesla is making sure that fleet-wide hack or any vehicle-specific hack can occur. They have the same problem with cell phones. It's kind of crazy today that we live quite comfortably in a world that George Orwell would have thought was super crazy. Like we all carry a phone with a microphone that can be turned on really at any time without our knowledge, with a GPS that knows our position, and a camera, and well, kind of all of our personal information. We do this willingly, and it's kind of wild to think that that's the case. So the phone, like Apple and Google, kind of have the same challenge of making sure there cannot be a fleet-wide hack or a system-wide hack of phones, or a specific hack. So that's our top concern. Yeah, it's going to become a bigger and bigger concern. I think Tesla's, I don't want to tempt fate here, but Tesla's pretty good at software compared to the other car companies. So I think it's going to be a bit like an even bigger challenge for the other car companies to ensure security. Yeah.
Thank you. Governor Dugard.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Musk, thank you for speaking to all the governors today. It's an honor to have you here. One question I had, we saw when gasoline prices went to $3.50 a gallon, there was a big jump in interest in hybrid vehicles, sure. and you saw those vehicles become very much in demand, and then as gasoline prices have fallen, you've seen a reversal of that. And I'm wondering to what extent you have a concern about the future of electric vehicles in the face of those very low prices. Can you speak to that?
Well, the economics, they kind of set the slope of the curve. So there's no question in my mind whatsoever that all transport, with the ironic exception of rockets, will go fully electric. Everything. Planes, trains, automobiles. Well, a lot of trains are already electric. All ships. But it's a question of what that time frame is. And the economic incentive structure drives that time frame. That's really what it amounts to. And the big challenge is that there's an unpriced externality in the cost of fossil fuels. So the unpriced externality is the probability weighted harm of changing the chemical constituency of the atmosphere and oceans. Since it is not captured in the price of gasoline, it does not drive the right behavior. It would be like if tossing out garbage was just free, and there was no penalty. You just do as much as you want. Then, like, streets would be full of garbage. And we regulated a lot of other things like sulfur emissions and nitrous oxide emissions and that kind of thing. It's done a lot of good on that front. With CO2, it's tough because there's so many vested interests on the sort of fossil fuel side. And sometimes I feel like those guys feel like kind of hard done by because it wasn't obvious like when they were creating their oil and gas companies that it would be bad for the environment. And they worked really hard to create those companies. And then they feel like, well, now they're being kind of attacked on moral grounds when they didn't originally start those oil companies or build them up on bad moral grounds. And it is true that we cannot instantaneously change to a sustainable situation. But then those guys will also fight pretty hard to slow down the change. And that's really where I think is morally wrong.
Go to Governor Bevin and then Governor Hutchinson. Then we'll take a couple, and then Governor Hickenlooper, and then we'll take some audience questions. Governor Bevin.
Elon, thank you for being here. The short version of the question, and then slightly longer. The short version is, do you ever feel pressure by others' expectations of you and your endeavors in light of the progress you've made thus far, is the short version. And more specifically, when you look just at Tesla alone, and you look at a company with a $54 billion valuation, right, and seemingly by typical market metrics, no justifiable reason for that.
What are you saying?
I'm just saying, I'm curious.
Sir.
I'm just, in all seriousness, do you feel a concern ever that your intellect and your intellectual curiosity and your ingenuity cannot be matched by those that are trying to commercialize it? Does that ever affect how you think or decisions that you make?
Well, it is actually, I find it quite tough when there are very high expectations. I try to actually tamp down those expectations as to be possible. In fact, I've gone on record several times as saying that the stock price is higher than we have any right to deserve. And that's for sure true based on where we are today and have been in the past. So the stock price obviously reflects a lot of optimism about where Tesla will be in the future. And now the thing that makes that quite a difficult emotional hardship for me is that those expectations sometimes get out of control. And I hate disappointing people, and so I'm trying real hard to meet those expectations, but that's a pretty tall order. And a lot of times it's really not fun, I have to say. A whole lot less fun than it may seem. So, yeah. I mean, I don't ever sell any stock unless I have to for taxes. So, I've said publicly, I'm not going to take money off the table. I'll be last. I'm going down with the ship. So I'll be the last to do it. Yeah, I mean, it's. Oh, I really wouldn't recommend anyone start a car company. I really wouldn't recommend it. It's not a recipe for happiness and freedom.
Thanks, Governor Bevin. Governor Hutchinson.
Mr. Musk, Asa Hutchinson from Arkansas. Thank you for your frank observations about exploration. I look at the spirit of invention and the spirit of exploration, which is really the hallmark of America. What is your comment on NASA, its mission? I was in Congress. I supported NASA, but I always feel like it's floundering, does not have the support of the American people that's needed. What's your comment on NASA, its mission, and what advice would you give us?
Sure. Well, first of all, I should say I'm a big fan of NASA. In fact, at one point, my password was "I love NASA." Literally, that was my password. I think NASA does a lot of good things for which it doesn't get enough credit, and that the public, I guess, doesn't know that much about. Most members of the public they're not really into hard science. You know, it's like it's not the thing they're tuning in for most of the time. I love hard science, you know, but it's not that popular. So, but there's great things in terms of the telescopes like the Hubble and the James Webb and the rovers on Mars and the probes to the outer solar system. Those are all like really great things. But to get the public excited, you've got to get people in the picture. It's just 100 times different if there are people in the picture. You know, if there's some criticism of NASA, it's like important to remember people in the picture. You know, if you want to get the public support. But like if you talk to a scientist about that, they said like, well, where's the science in that? Like, you're not getting it. It's like, that's not why people are giving you money. I mean, it's a little bit of the reason, but the serious scientists are like, people just make things more expensive. Like, why do we have people? Like, okay, well, why do we have people at all? Or anywhere? Sometimes the scientists are the ones who just don't understand. Even though they're like smart people, but like, you know. So you got to have something that's gonna fire up the, you know, fire people up and get them really excited. And like, I think if we had a serious goal of having a base on the moon and sending people to Mars, and said, okay, we're going to be outcome oriented. How are we going to do this? Okay, we got to change the way contracting is done. You can't do these like cost plus sole source contracts, because then the incentive structure is all messed up. So as soon as you don't have any competition, well, okay, there's no sense of urgency goes away. And as soon as you make something a cost plus contract, you're incenting the contractor to maximize the costs of the program because they get a percentage. So they never want that gravy train to end, and they want to make it they become cost maximizers. And then you have good people engaged in cost maximization because you just gave them incentive to do that and told them they'll get punished if they don't. Essentially, that's what happens. So it's critically important that we change the contracting structure to be a competitive commercial bid. Make sure that there are always at least two entities that are competing to serve NASA, and that the contracts are milestone based with concrete milestones. PowerPoint presentations do not count. Like everything works in PowerPoint. Okay, you can say, I have a teleportation device. Look, here's my PowerPoint presentation. So milestone-based, competitive commercial contracts with competitors, and then you've got to be prepared to fire one of those competitors if they're not cutting it, and recompete the remainder of that contract. And by the way, NASA's actually already done this, and they did it with the commercial cargo transportation to the space station. And that was a case where NASA, NASA actually, I'm not sure if they thought it would work or not work, but they didn't have the budget to do anything else. So they're like, okay, we're going to try this competitive commercial milestone-based contracting, and it worked great. And they awarded it to two companies, to SpaceX and a company called Kistler. And SpaceX managed to meet the milestones. Kistler did not, so then NASA recompeted the remainder of the contract to Orbital Sciences, but then Orbital Sciences got across the finish line. So now NASA's got two suppliers for taking cargo to the space station, and it's a great situation. Same thing for commercial crew to the space station. NASA competed that. In the commercial crew case, it's SpaceX and Boeing. And I think that's also a good situation. So now, like I can tell you, like the SpaceX team is like, we're going to do this before Boeing. That's for sure. And then like I bet at the Boeing team, they're like, we're going to do this before SpaceX. That's good. It's a good forcing function to get things done. I can't tell you how important that contracting structure is. That is night and day. There's way too much in government which is where it's a sole source cost plus contract. That just, again, economics 101, whatever you incent, well, that will happen. And people shouldn't be surprised. It's like, oh, you just, said, okay, if that company manages to find some excuse to double the cost of the contract, they're going to get double the profit because they're getting a percentage. So they can do exactly that. And also, they're not going to say no to requirements. So the government will come up with some set of requirements. 90% of them could make a lot of sense, and 10% of them are cockamamie that double the price of the project. But those 10% of cockamamie requirements in a cost-plus contract, the contractor will always say yes.
There could be a future for you in government contracting at the state level.
Yeah.
Let's go to Governor Hickenlooper and then Governor Ducey.
So I think like most governors, I find it so refreshing to have the unbridled truth, but I do suspect every time you say publicly that the stock price is higher than we have any right to believe, I'm going to guess you probably get some calls from investors suggesting that maybe you don't say that so frequently.
Yeah, that's true.
I wanted to go back and just briefly, because I think I wrote this down, that you said that artificial intelligence is the fundamental existential risk facing civilization. Did I get that close enough?
In my opinion, it is the biggest risk that we face as a civilization is artificial intelligence.
And so, to a group of leaders, what would you advise that how should we be addressing something that's such a large landscape and yet obviously so important?
I think that one of the roles of government is to ensure the public good, and to that dangers to the public are addressed. So that hence the regulatory thing. I think the first order of business would be to try to learn as much as possible. To understand the nature of the issues, to look closely at the progress that is being made and the remarkable achievements of artificial intelligence. Last year, Go, which is quite a difficult game to beat, that people thought would never be beaten with by a computer, that a computer would either never beat the best human player or that it was 20 years away. And last year, AlphaGo, which was done by DeepMind, which is a kind of a Google subsidiary, absolutely crushed the world's best player. And now it can play the top 50 simultaneously and crush them all. So, just like that pace of progress is remarkable. And you can see more and more coming out. I think the robotics, you can see robots that can learn to walk from nothing, within hours, like way faster than any biological being. But the thing that's most dangerous is, and it's the hardest to kind of wrap, kind of get your arms around because it's not a physical thing, is kind of a deep intelligence in the network. He said, well, what harm could a deep intelligence in the network do? So, well, it could start a war by doing fake news and spoofing email accounts and fake press releases, and just by manipulating information. The pen is mightier than the sword. As an example, I want to emphasize, I do not think this actually occurred. This is purely a hypothetical that I'm digging my grave here. But there was that second Malaysian airliner that was shot down on the Ukrainian-Russian border, and that really amplified tensions between Russia and the EU in a massive way. Well, let's say if you had an AI that was where the AI's goal was to maximize the value of a portfolio of stocks. One of the ways to maximize value would be to go long on defense, short on consumer, start a war. And then how could it do that? Well, hack into the Malaysian Airlines aircraft routing server a route over a war zone, then send an anonymous tip that an enemy aircraft is flying overhead right now.
Let's go to Governor Ducey, and then we'll have, after Governor Ducey, we'll finish our gubernatorial questions, and then 2 questions, and then quick questions, or 1 audience question, and then we'll be done. We're running short on time. Governor Ducey.
Thanks, Elon. I really enjoyed your comments today. And as someone who has spent a lot of time in his administration trying to reduce and eliminate regulations, I was surprised by your suggestion to bring regulations before we know exactly what we're dealing with AI. You know, and I've heard the example used, if I were to come up with a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas that was explosive, people would say, well, you have to ban that, and then we'd have no natural gas. So you've given some of these examples of how AI can be an existential threat, but I still don't understand as policymakers what type of regulations beyond slow down, which typically policymakers don't get in front of entrepreneurs or innovators.
Well, I think the first order of business would be to gain insight. Right now, the government does not even have insight. And I think the right order of business would be to stand up a regulatory agency, initial goal, gain insight into the status of AI activity, make sure the situation is understood. Once it is, then put regulations in place to ensure public safety. That's it. And for sure, the companies doing AI will, most of them, not mine, will squawk and say, hey, this is really going to stifle innovation, blah, 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 it's going to move to China. It won't. It won't, because has Boeing moved to China? Nope. They're building aircraft here. Same on cars. And so it's the notion that if you establish a regulatory regime, that companies will just simply move to countries with lower regulatory requirements is false on the face of it, because none of them do. Unless it's really overbearing, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm just talking about, making sure that there is awareness at the government level. I think once there is awareness, people will be extremely afraid, as they should be.
All right, 1 audience question. We'll take the first hand that came up. Right here.
Thanks, Elon. Ina Fried with Axios. Early on in this administration, you had argued pretty vociferously that it was best to engage and better to be in the room than not be in the room. Then when the president decided to pull out of Paris, you said that was kind of the last straw and you were going to drop off. What drove you to that? And if you were still speaking to him today, what would you say to the president?
Well, I thought it was worth doing, trying hard to, to do what's worth. It was worth trying. I got a lot of flack from multiple fronts for even trying. When some guy ran at billboards and attacking me and full-page ads in the New York Times and whatnot, just for being on the panel, and in every meeting I was just trying to make the arguments in favor of sustainability and sometimes other issues, like we need to make sure that our immigration laws are not unkind or unreasonable, did my best, and I think in a few cases I did actually make some progress, which gave me some encouragement to continue. But then I just really think that the Paris Accord, man, if I stayed on the councils, then I'd be essentially saying that wasn't important, but it was super important, because I think a country needs to keep its word, it's not even a binding agreement. So we could always slow it down. The argument that there would be job losses, well, we could see if there are job losses before we exit the agreement. And maybe there won't be job losses, maybe there'll be job gains. But yeah, there's just no way I could stay on after that. So, you know, did my best.
All right. All right, well, everybody, if you would please join me in thanking Elon for being here.